So my name is Michaela Hurst. I'm a Senior Director of Core Service Design at Instruction Partners, which really just means I lead a lot of our internal learning and professional development, and do a lot of our continuous improvement that we do, specifically around the service offerings that we offer to partners. Before my time at Instruction Partners, I've served as an elementary school leader, a district leader, an instructional coach, and at my core, and one of my most favorite roles was a fifth grade ELA teacher. I'm also really excited to be joined with my colleague, Christina. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Gonzalez. I am the director of ELA. I have been with Instruction Partners for about 8 years. Before that, I spent many years as an ELA teacher, a building-based reading specialist, a district-level ELA instructional coach, and I do a lot of the research and development for the ELA tools and resources, some of which you will see today, that we share with our partners. And my heart is in all things ELA, so I'm excited to jump into this with you today.
Awesome. So we've heard a little bit just about what you all are hoping to learn today, but we want to learn a little bit more and kind of get a sense of where you are with unit internalization so we can kind of respond to that through our time together. So we're going to launch a quick poll, and we'd love for you to select the statement that most closely describes unit internalization in your current context. Completely anonymous poll. We can be vulnerable and honest, but love to see where you all are right now with unit internalization. So take a moment to reflect, read, and reflect. Great. Thank you all for engaging in that. So, seeing lots of shared experiences and shared current states, we're definitely going to work to define what unit internalization is, talk about the purpose and why behind engaging in unit internalization, and then we're going to have some time to really get into the weeds. I'm seeing some folks saying, hey, we have some time, but the expectations may not be that clear. And so, we're going to get into the weeds of what that time could really be spent like and how to set up some purposeful expectations around that time. So thank you all just for your vulnerability there. Now let's go ahead and dive a little bit deeper. Before we do, I want to take a moment to just frame a little bit more about who we are at Instruction Partners, starting with our mission, especially if you were not able to engage in that first session that we did. So here on the screen, you can see our mission. We are a nonprofit organization, and we're focused on strengthening instructional leadership. We believe that strong instructional leadership really translates to stronger student learning. Here at Instruction Partners, we pay particular attention to the learning experiences of students of color, students experiencing poverty, multilingual learners, and students with disabilities. And so we've had the privilege of working right alongside hundreds of instructional leaders across the country, and we're really focused in on helping them build content-specific professional learning structures. So really tapping into collaborative planning, observation and feedback, coaching that will really meet teachers' needs and drive student learning. So today we're going to really focus in on the power of unit internalization in ELA and share a little bit more about our approach to building effective internalization protocols. So we talked about defining what unit internalization is. Here we define unit internalization as the process by which teachers study a unit deeply. When they're studying that unit, we want them to really understand what students are expected to learn, how students will be assessed, and what is that arc of learning over the course of the unit. And so teachers can engage in this process collaboratively with their peers during a PLC time before they start teaching each unit. It's so important that teachers have this time to really study that unit deeply because many of the most critical instructional decisions for student learning should really be made at this level. During this process, teachers start developing that clear understanding of the specific learning goals they want students to achieve. Then they can work backwards from those goals and identify, okay, which key lessons and students' tasks will have the greatest impact to help us meet those goals. And those are the lessons and tasks that we want teachers prioritizing because we know there's not always enough time to cover all of the content in the unit. So we want to empower teachers to make those really sharp instructional decisions. So I'm going to pass it to Christina to talk a little bit more in the weeds about what that could look like.
Thanks, Michaela. As Michaela said, unit internalization can serve many purposes. You can leverage it to build content knowledge with your teachers. You can leverage it to make prioritization decisions or to prepare for unfinished learning. Depending on what you're trying to achieve with unit internalization, teachers need to build certain habits to support reaching those outcomes. Because of this, we've designed a set of habits that could be prioritized and combined in different ways to create a unit internalization protocol aligned with the specific outcome that you're hoping to achieve. So first, we're going to take a look at the 6 habits for internalization for ELA, and then we'll talk about how do I use those habits to create a unit internalization protocol. There are 6 habits that we're going to review. We'll stop after the first 3 for some reflection and processing. But let's jump in and talk about the first habit. Okay. Each habit includes a set of teacher actions and guiding questions to help teachers develop that habit. We call this set of action steps and guiding questions a habit because we know that these are the things teachers need to do over and over again. And we don't want unit internalization to feel like an exercise in compliance or just copying and pasting from the curriculum. Instead, over many years and many observations, we have made note of things that master teachers do to deeply understand a unit before they begin teaching it. In other words, we know what the habits are that they engage in, whether collectively or individually, to internalize a unit. We're going to start with the first one, which is examining anchor text in the unit. We know that reading all of the text in a unit in advance of teaching the unit is ideal, but we also know it's not always a feasible goal for teachers. But we do want them to skim through the core text and supplementary material and ask themselves, what genres am I teaching in this unit? How complex are the texts in this unit? How do these texts connect to one another and to the unit's larger themes and goals? If teachers don't do this, a pitfall, as an example, might be that teachers find themselves building a student's background knowledge explicitly during a text because they're like, a student needs to know this to be able to engage in this unit. But then they find out, oh, in the next text, the student actually could have built that background knowledge for themselves. So it helps give teachers a lens into what do I need to do as a teacher and what are students going to do on their own to build background knowledge, build vocabulary, things like that. And these texts are all part of what we call the unit's knowledge story, which brings us to our next habit. We know from abundant research that reading ability and knowledge of the world are tightly connected. So we really want teachers to understand the knowledge story, not just reading skills. The students will gain, but the skills that students will gain through reading, writing, and speaking about the text in the unit. There's a report from student achievement partners called Reading as Liberation, an examination of the research base that tells us that the effects of neglecting knowledge building on many students have been significant and lingering. This is something we have to pay attention to. Yes, students will be learning about theme and figurative language and summarizing. We know that, and main idea, but we also know that students need a strong knowledge base to be able to do these things. High quality instructional materials do a great job of creating those knowledge stories for us. So if your school has adopted a high quality curriculum, you are already in good shape. As an example, if you use the EL curriculum, one of the things 5th grade students will build their knowledge of is human rights. If you use the Wit and Wisdom curriculum, 2nd graders will be building their knowledge around good eating habits. If you've adopted Odell, 10th grade students will be building their knowledge of Alexander Hamilton. This habit asks teachers to orient to the unit at a high level by reviewing the text and the unit overview, and asking the teachers should be asking themselves, what knowledge of the world will students gain by reading these texts? And each text is going to be a different piece of that knowledge puzzle. So it's really important for teachers to have a big picture of the text that students are going to engage with. This habit also encourages teachers to think about, how can I make the content relevant and engaging for my students? As an example, if you are using grade 4 Amplify, grade 4 students are studying empires in the Middle Ages. As a teacher, you might have to think about, how am I going to make empires in the Middle Ages relevant and engaging for my fourth grade students in the 21st century? So that's the second piece of that knowledge story, is how am I going to engage students in that knowledge? A third habit that we are encouraging teachers to develop, as Michaela mentioned at the beginning, is an understanding of the arc of learning for the unit. We really want teachers to identify the standards that students are expected to master and to name the parts of the standards that demand the most time and attention for the students. If these are the standards that are being covered in the unit, which part of those standards do my students need to spend most time with? We also want them to think about what knowledge students need as a prerequisite for the new learning and what assessments they can use to gauge student readiness. A review of the lessons will help teachers to see how content builds and evolves from lesson to lesson. It might even be helpful to ask your teachers to create a visual for themselves that represents the outline and the learning progression for the unit, so they can see at a glance, this is where I'm starting, this is where we're landing. I need to make sure all of these things happen in between the starting point and the landing point, so my students are ready when we get to the landing point. Michaela, the first three habits are pretty robust. This feels like it might be a good time for a purposeful pause for our participants.
Thanks so much, Christina. Yeah, I'm definitely resonating with a lot of nuggets that you dropped in there. So let's all take a moment to just stop here and reflect in the chat. Of the three habits that Christina referenced, I'd love to know, which do you think would be most supportive to your teachers right now based on their current practices, and why? Take a moment to reflect and drop in the chat. Thanks for your thoughts so far. Definitely, Cynthia, totally relate. All three could have meaning, and then all of our teachers are at different levels or might focus on different things. An over prioritization of the skills at times and not zooming out to the knowledge. Definitely, Jason. Awesome. Thank you so much for your reflections there. I'm going to pass it back to Christina to keep us going.
Thanks, Michaela. Okay, building on the last habit we shared, which was consider the arc of learning, is an analysis of the unit's assessments. Once teachers know the arc of learning, they can begin to think about how they're going to assess students' progress towards mastery throughout the unit. This particular habit relies heavily on backwards planning. Teachers must know what the end of unit assessment is so that they can plan for aligned checks for understanding throughout the unit. In other words, teachers must be able to ask themselves, how will students be expected to demonstrate learning in this unit? Most, if not all, of the high quality curricula include scoring guides to help teachers assess student mastery throughout the unit. And the teacher's deep understanding of these scoring guides will influence what teachers prioritize in day-to-day lessons leading up to the assessments. To build an understanding of the scoring guides, teachers could read and annotate the rubric and ask themselves, What does mastery look like here? If the curriculum that your school uses includes exemplar student responses, teachers can annotate those against the rubric. If your curriculum doesn't include exemplar responses, it's a great time for teachers to co-craft an exemplar. This allows teachers to distinguish what a beginning response looks like versus an advanced one. And knowing this will help teachers to name potential challenges as areas they want to prioritize instruction so that students can do well on the assessment. Anticipating where students might need support is a habit that we want teachers to develop, but that is also very unique and personal to the student sitting in front of them and the funds of knowledge and experience that those students bring to the table. Teachers should begin developing this habit of anticipating where students might need support by asking themselves, knowing what now know about my students, what are some potential misconceptions that might lead students to the wrong answer? Or knowing what I know about my students, what background knowledge might students need to build in advance of or while reading the text? Knowing these things will help the teacher to plan for those aspects of text that might disrupt comprehension and how they can support students in working through those misconceptions and in mitigating text complexities. Michaela, we have one habit left to chat about. When you were a school leader, what often surfaced as a challenge for your teachers?
I think most people are probably thinking it, but it really was the time. When I was a school leader, the curriculum we were using, teachers would often say, there's just not enough time to cover everything. And so oftentimes that was a real challenge they were dealing with. So they either slowed down and then they risked not actually completing units and actually getting through some of the most critical content, or they sped up and they actually sacrificed depth of learning. And so teachers really needed that guidance and collaboration to help them. We talked about earlier, kind of like the zooming out, using that zoomed out information that they have about the unit to make those informed pacing decisions.
Michaela, what you're saying is the same thing that the research is telling us, and that is when teachers are forced to make pacing decisions, breadth of coverage often trumps depth. So let's jump into the next habit, which is plan for pacing. Let's first talk about within unit pacing. All of the information that teachers gained through the other 5 habits can inform the strategic pacing decisions that teachers need to make. We know from vast experience with most, if not all, of the published high quality instructional materials that the recommended pacing is often noted by teachers and leaders as an implementation challenge. When faced with that challenge, teachers either slow down and risk lack of coverage, or they speed up and they sacrifice depth of learning. And as I said, the research shows us they often sacrifice depth of learning. Teachers can use all of the information that they have about the unit to make informed pacing decisions, but that can and likely is going to look different from school to school. Now let's talk about prioritizing content for the year. As I mentioned earlier, we know that pacing is a common implementation challenge, but it doesn't have to be a guessing game. It is possible for school leaders to do the math. Ask yourselves, how many minutes does the publisher recommend for a lesson? And how much instructional time is actually available for students from the first day of school till the last day of school? Then do the math. What's the difference between the publisher's recommendations and actual seat times that students in your building have? Now, as a school leader, you know how much content a teacher could realistically teach to the appropriate depth of the course of the year. And now you will need to make some strategic decisions on what to omit or compress, if necessary, in the units in your curriculum. If prioritizing content at the year level is something that you're considering, Vanessa is going to share a blog post that we have that goes into more detail around how school leaders can prioritize content and high quality instructional materials at the year level. Michaela, speaking of pacing, I think our participants might be ready for another purposeful pause.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Same as before. We've now talked about three additional habits, and I'd love to hear from you when you think about your teachers, which would be most supportive to them right now based on their current practices and why. I know what Christina was sharing about doing that math was something as a school leader that I didn't always ready my teachers with that information and really sit with exactly how many days and minutes within the seat they have. So love to hear from you all, what's resonating with you. Thanks, Joey. Thanks, Jason. Absolutely. Seeing lots in the chat. Of course, all of these areas important, but also seeing people naming in their current context and based on what's currently happening, maybe a schedule shift, maybe current needs of their students. One of these might be prioritized in this season more than the other. So that actually kind of brings us to our next kind of point here. We're going to be dropping a resource in the chat that really just outlines all of the great teacher actions and guiding questions that Christina just covered. We want you to pause for a moment to kind of soak that all in. And I know you're thinking these are wide ranging. They can't all be covered in that one PLC session. And so in a moment, after you have some processing time, Christina's going to walk us through a process for actually zeroing in on specific habits and building out a protocol that's tailored to teachers' needs. So take a moment to read and reflect, and then we'll continue. All righty, I'm going to pass it to Christina now to walk through an example of what it might look like to build out that protocol.
All right, Michaela. All right, let's start off by saying that different curricula, different schools, different grade levels, even different teachers have unique needs when it comes to unit internalization habits that they need to successfully implement a curriculum. So let me walk you through an example of what it might look to build a unit internalization protocol using these habits that meet the unique needs of your school and your context. So let's imagine that I worked with the leaders at Instruct Up Middle School to determine what outcome they wanted to be true for unit internalization. And they landed on wanting teachers to better understand how daily questions and tasks help students prepare for the end of unit performance assessments. Once they named the unit internalization outcome that they're striving for, we read through the habits again. Examine anchor text, identify the knowledge story, consider the arc of learning, analyze the assessments, anticipate areas where students might need support, plan for pacing. And we thought, okay, if we want teachers to better understand how the daily questions and tasks prepare students for the end of unit performance task, we need the teachers to consider the arc of learning. What are students working towards in this unit? and we need them to analyze the unit assessments. How will we measure progress towards the end of unit performance task during this unit? So we landed on the two habits that we landed on are considering the arc of learning and analyzing the assessments. Then I worked with Instruct Up middle school leaders to build a unit internalization protocol that centers these two habits and that allocates sufficient time for teachers to engage in the necessary actions and questions from this habit. We're going to drop the link to this example protocol, and then I'm going to highlight some key protocol design moves that I made with Instruct Up Middle School when we were creating their protocol. So take a minute to read the protocol and drop your noticings in the chat. As you're reviewing that sample protocol, feel free to drop in the chat things that you're noticing about the protocol.
Seeing Joey point out the vision and the clear time constraints. Nina starting with backwards planning.
Okay, we're going to jump a little bit, we're a little deeply into this protocol, and I'm going to highlight some of those key protocol design moves that we made. First, Instruct Up Middle School has 60 minutes, one time a week for grade level collaborative planning. So whatever we do, we have to do it in 60 minutes. When we look at the protocol for internalization, notice the teacher actions and guiding questions. Oops, y'all, I'm having technical difficulty. My screen went blank. Sorry. Okay, we're back. Um, as you are looking at it, notice that the questions and guiding habits are much more robust than the ones that I shared with you in the sample habits earlier on. Um, these are all the things we need a teacher to do to develop a particular habit. As you use these habits to drive the design of your unit internalization protocol, you might be thinking, well, my teachers don't need to collaboratively annotate an exemplar student response. We've been doing that for 3 years. If teachers can do it on their own, great. Consider asking them to annotate the exemplar as pre-work, or consider omitting that step altogether, but reminding teachers that they should continue with that already established action step on their own. The habits are very much a la carte, and for the most part, you can pick and choose to meet the precise needs of your teacher and the outcome that you are seeking. Finally, I worked with the leaders to add any components to the protocol that are aligned with the school's learning culture and practices so that the protocol would feel familiar and part of the great work already in place at the school, not something else teachers have to do. As an example, at Instruct Up Middle School, they have a new vision for collaborative planning, and they really want to reinforce it by sharing it at the beginning of their planning time. So I wanted to be sure as we built out the agenda and the protocol that we were holding space to make sure that happens.
So, Christina, as you built this protocol, I know you focus on those two habits. When are teachers doing all of the other habits that are in there?
Good question, Michaela. We are not ignoring the other habits. What this means is that as Instruct Up Middle School's outcomes evolve, so too is their planning protocol going to evolve. And as teachers master a specific set of habits, those might be phased out of collaborative planning time, knowing that teachers can engage in those habits independently, and then new habits will be phased in.
Thanks, Christina. And then I'm just like thinking about different school environments that I've been in. Um, Sometimes we have like 30 minutes potentially for this time. What would you recommend in that situation?
Yeah, Michaela, that's probably one of the most frequently asked questions we've get, is folks don't always have 60 minutes one time a week to get things done. So I've seen school leaders get really creative around how to still center unit internalization given the specific amount of time that they've had. I've seen school leaders use the dedicated PD days for unit internalization. Because remember, Michaela, if your curriculum only has 4 units, you're only going to do this 4 times a year. So maybe they're using the PD days, or maybe they've set the expectation for teachers to do a one-on-one planning with the coach. Another option I've seen, although this is not ideal, is that the school leaders have sometimes established the expectation, if they have to, that the unit internalization is done solo because there is no collaborative planning time. Michaela, you can also think about pre-work as an option if you're a school leader, and you don't have a lot of collaborative planning time, and that's like determining what pre-work is reasonable based on your teacher's capacity, and their specific needs. But if you do ask the teachers to engage in pre-work as an option for saving time, I would be sure to discuss and agree with them concrete deadlines so that all teachers and leaders can enter the collaborative planning and engage in a meaningful way. And to revise those proposed timelines if teachers can't meet those deadlines, because if they don't do the pre-work and then they can't engage in the collaborative planning, then all is for naught. And then you could provide a completed example of the quality and depth that you're expecting from the pre-work so that leaders and teachers are clear on exactly what you're asking for if you're a school leader who's asking them to do some pre-work. Michaela, we've taken these folks through quite a lot in a very short amount of time, so I'm going to stamp for them what we've done. When you're building a unit internalization protocol, start by identifying the outcome that you want to be true for your teachers in your building. Name the most important habits that contribute to teachers being able to achieve this outcome. Create the protocol to guide teachers through this work, and then personalize it by including your school's particular culture of learning, or practices that your school always engages in when they're engaging in PLC work together. Um, Teachers are coming to us with many strong habits already in place for unit internalization. That's who we learned from. So we just want to help teachers build some consistency in their habits within and across grade levels. So, Michaela, I think now is a good time for me to turn it over to our participants to see what questions they might have.
Thanks so much, Christina. We've got a couple coming in the chat right now, but we'd love to give everyone a moment. If you haven't already, please share some questions in that Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we're going to try to get through as many of those as we can with the time we have remaining. If we can't get to a question today, we can publish some questions and answers on our blog, and we'll be sure to send that out to everyone here today. Christina, since you just spoke on the steps from the previous slide, we have a question of, are those steps sequential? Actually, that might be referring to the habits being sequential.
Are the habits sequential? Is that the question, Michaela?
Yes, they said yes, the habits.
Yeah, so, no. Think of the habits as these are all of the things that in a perfect world, teachers would be able to do as soon as they sat down to internalize a lesson, because we've seen really masterful teachers do these things, but we also know teachers can't get good at every habit at the same time. So you want to pick the habit that moves your teachers closest to the outcome that you are hoping to achieve. And that doesn't necessarily mean the habits need to be done in order. It means you just need to really think about what are the trade-offs. If my teachers are working on these 2 habits and not the other 4, are the trade-offs worth it? So there's just some thinking that you need to do about which of those habits are going to move teachers closest to the ideal situation that you're hoping for.
Sure. Thanks, Christina. Also wondering, I know we've worked with a lot of small schools and small systems and districts here at Instruction Partners. Have you had any experience supporting those small schools where there may only be one teacher per subject area that needs to go through this process?
Michaela, I have seen every scenario you can possibly imagine. But one that comes to me specifically was a really small school in Memphis, and there was only one teacher on each grade level. And the principal and the assistant principal split up the collaborative planning time, and they actually went in and spent the hour a week with one teacher at each grade level doing the unit internalization. So I think that was a great way for that principle to show us, hey, we even in a small situation with very limited resources and only a few people available, how we can make it work. I've also seen places where schools have prioritized particular grade levels for whatever reason. Maybe there are three new teachers in third grade and there's only one instructional coach for K-12. So that coach is only going to lead the unit internalization for third grade because there are three new teachers. So I've seen it, leaders get really creative depending on what the exact scenario is and what their context is.
For sure. I'm also thinking that would inform the design of the protocol because we do want it to be feasible for teachers. We might have to be even more bite sized if they're going to be balancing multiple grades and internalizing multiple units.
Yeah, and we do want it to be feasible for our who's ever leading, facilitating the protocol, right? We one instruction partners does not expect a school principal to read every text from K through 5 that their students are going to be reading that year. So we also need to make sure that the protocol is feasible for the person who is facilitating the collaborative planning and the unit internalization.
For sure. Keep dropping those questions in, but this actually connects to one other question. How should facilitators, we spoke a lot about the experience, not as much about how should facilitators be preparing themselves to facilitate this type of experience for teachers?
Yeah, so one of the conditions that we name at Instruction Partners that's important for successful internalization and collaborative planning is well-trained facilitators. So we would want them to I would imagine you would want them to collaborate on the development of the protocol so that they really understand the purpose behind the protocol and why the different things are happening when they're happening. I also would encourage the facilitator to practice a lesson or a unit internalization with feedback before they go live in front of their teachers. I would also encourage a facilitator to do the work of the internalization. So whatever we are asking teachers to do that in advance of leading the unit internalization. And I would also encourage facilitators to be ready to be very clear with teachers around the purpose of that time together and the outcome, particularly if collaborative planning and unit internalization is new to teachers. We want to make sure they know this is why we're sitting around the table together. This is what we hope our outcome is, and that we can invest teachers in the work as well.
Mhm. Thanks, Christina. So, a question and a follow-up question here. So we know it can be helpful to divide and conquer. What limitations do you encounter in upholding the integrity of units when and if teachers aren't directly interacting with the internalization process? And there's a follow-up to that of when encountering those limitations, how do you address those challenges? So I'm thinking if maybe this person is thinking if teachers are kind of taking parts of it and working collaboratively on this?
Yeah, I think that's going to inform which internalization habits you want teachers to center on in their practice. If they are, and Michaela, am I understanding the question correctly? If we can only do parts of this, like we only have time to do X, Y, Z, how to handle that? Yeah, I think that's going to be a strategic decision you're going to make when you're deciding on which habits you want to focus on. And as I said earlier, if teachers are already good at something, then that's not a habit you want to prioritize. Just because it's listed as a habit on the document doesn't mean it's something that's going to get attention from your teachers. So I think that's the opportunity where you have to think strategically about um, what's really feasible for my teachers and what habits do they really need to master. And teachers are going to get good at the habits, right? They're probably already doing many of them already. And then you could phase those out and phase in the new habits. So if think of that as an evolution. Let's get really good at this small chunk first. Let's get really good at this small chunk next. Michaela, I hope that answered that question.
For sure. And then I think ongoing, utilizing what we're seeing instructionally as leaders to make adjustments and framing for teachers that we're going to make adjustments along the way based on how this is impacting you, how it's impacting your students, and what we're seeing instructionally in classrooms. And I think this last question is great to kind of close us off on, Christina. Maybe we can each give a response here. What are 2 to 3 things school leaders can do to support teachers engaging in lesson internalization? I'm thinking specifically about school leaders who don't see themselves as instructional leaders. And I think the thing, Christina kind of named this earlier, but the thing that's popping for me is really being in it with teachers, really trying to do the work that you're asking teachers to do, really studying units yourself, setting some bite-sized goals for yourself. I know me as an elementary school leader, I taught fifth grade ELA. I'd been really in the ELA world, but now I am a school leader. And so I am supporting all content areas. And so I would set little bite-sized goals for myself to, at the time we were using Eureka, really understand that curriculum closely, go through the same process that I wanted teachers to do. Probably can't do it as regularly as I'm asking teachers to do, but I'm building my own capacity alongside theirs. And I'm trying to model that level of capacity building and growth right alongside my teachers. Christina, what would you add?
I'm thinking about the poll you dropped at the beginning. We had a fair amount of participants who said they already have one of the enabling conditions in place, which is time, but no clear expectations around how to use that time. And so I think about one of the conditions that needs to be in place for effective unit internalization is vision setting. So I think school leaders need to work and if they don't feel strongly ELA is not their particular subject matter of expertise to work with their teachers or their coaches, but they need a vision for what they want collaborative planning to look like. And then I think back to like 20 years ago when we had collaborative planning and our conversation was all about like who's going to make the copies of the bus field trip permission slip and things like that because nobody told us otherwise. So I think this is the time for leaders to say, here's my vision for unit internalization or collaborative planning time. And here are the expectations for how you spend that time. Because if you don't tell teachers, they're not going to, it's not a guessing game. Just lay out, here's what I hope we can accomplish, and these are the steps we're going to do. So I think it's in terms of the change management piece, it's very important on the front end to invest teachers through the vision and through clarity of expectation.
Thanks so much, Christina. And thank you all for your engagement in the chat today, for your questions. We really, really appreciate you all for being here. And with that, we would love to get your feedback. Very, very short, we promise, but we'd love to get your feedback so we can continue to improve and make these as impactful as possible. So please take the short survey before heading out, and we hope everyone has a great rest of their day.